Imagine this. You and your classmates are given $100 to share. But there's a catch. Only 3 students get to decide how it's divided. How fair do you think the final outcome would be? That question gets to the heart of conflict theory. I'm that sociology teacher, and today we will be discussing one of the sociological paradigms, conflict theory. Conflict theory is a way of looking at society that says social life isn't mainly about harmony and cooperation. Instead, it's about competition, inequality, and struggles over power and resources. This perspective is most closely associated with Karl Marx, who argued that many social problems come from the unequal way wealth and power are distributed. At its core, conflict theory makes 3 key claims. First, some groups have more power and resources than others. Second, those with power tend to work to protect and maintain their advantages. And third, less powerful groups often push back, trying to change the system. In other words, society isn't shaped only by agreement. It's shaped by conflict between groups. One of the biggest focuses of conflict theory is economic class. Marx argued that society is divided into 2 main groups: the owners, people who own businesses, factories, and land, and the workers, people who sell their labor in order to survive. According to conflict theory, owners gain wealth by paying workers less than the value of what they produce. And this idea isn't just historical. We still see it today. For example, many CEOs make hundreds of times more than their employees, even though workers are the ones producing goods and providing services every single day. A modern example of this conflict is the minimum wage debate. Many workers argue that wages haven't kept up with the cost of living, while large corporations continue to report record profits. From a conflict theory perspective, this isn't accidental. It reflects an ongoing power struggle between corporations and workers. Conflict theory also looks closely at education. Schools are often described as the great equalizer, but conflict theorists argue that education can actually reproduce inequality. Schools in wealthier areas usually have newer buildings, better technology, smaller class sizes, and more counselors and programs. Meanwhile, schools in low-income areas often face overcrowding, outdated materials, and fewer opportunities. From a conflict theory point of view, this isn't random. It reflects how resources are unevenly distributed, giving some students a major head start from day one. Conflict theory also helps explain racial and gender inequality. For much of U.S. history, laws and policies were designed to benefit white men while limiting opportunities for others through slavery, segregation, voting restrictions, and job discrimination. Even today, conflict theorists point to patterns like the racial wealth gap, where white families, on average, hold far more wealth than Black and Latino families, and the gender pay gap, where women still earn less than men in many careers. These inequalities aren't just personal, they're structural, and they're often passed down across generations. One of the strongest modern examples of conflict theory in action is climate change. Large corporations, especially in fossil fuels, manufacturing, and agriculture, produce massive amounts of pollution and generate enormous profits. But the worst environmental damage often hits low-income communities and communities of color. These neighborhoods are more likely to be located near factories, highways, toxic waste sites, and flood-prone areas. Meanwhile, wealthier people in communities can often afford air conditioning, safer housing, insurance, or even moving away from danger. From a conflict theory perspective, climate change isn't just an environmental problem. It's a power and inequality problem. It forces us to ask who causes the most pollution, who suffers the most from it, and who has the power to avoid the damage. Youth climate protests, environmental justice movements, and protests against polluting companies all represent less powerful groups challenging powerful industries and governments. So, what does conflict theory ultimately teach us? It shows us that behind many of society's laws, traditions, and institutions is an ongoing struggle for power, wealth, and opportunity. It helps explain why inequality exists and why it's often so difficult to change. Conflict theory reminds us that when we see unfairness in society, it's rarely just about individual choices. It's about who has power and who doesn't. And the most important question conflict theorists want us to ask is this: who benefits from the way society is set up right now, and who is being left behind? Thank you for watching. Click the link below to access the conflict theory activity and explore the key vocabulary.